Hello there, everybody. This is Jay Frost, and welcome to How to Raise, the weekly CA-free accredited program from the Philanthropy Mastermind series, brought to you through the generous sponsorship of our friends at DonorSearch. And we won't be talking much about DonorSearch today, unless our guest chooses to mention them, but that's for any lack of appreciation. This is the 10th season of Philanthropy Mastermind's programming, underwritten by the folks at DonorSearch, and you can find plenty of recordings of this program and much more on their website at donorsearch.net under the resources tab. There's also a way to sign up for announcements on future shows, including our email that goes out every week with announcements. We've also dropped links to their YouTube channel where there are recordings of the last 2 years of content in the chat for easy access to all of our content. If it's not there now, it will be there momentarily. And we'll also make sure to give that verbally for those of you who are enjoying this as a recording after the fact. But if you're here, I hope you'll stick with us throughout, because it's a chance to not only learn a lot from our presenter, but also to learn a lot from one another and to ask your questions. I'm going to jump into all that right now. There are at least two features by joining us live that are really important. And one is the chat. And you can go ahead and participate in that by simply opening that thing up and saying hello, which is always a nice thing to do. So if you would do that and just say howdy or hello or whatever you'd like to say, and let us know maybe which part of the country or the world that you're from, that's a great way for our guests to know that you're here, and maybe which part of, once again, the country or the world that you're from, which organization you're with. All of that is very helpful as we embark on the session today. Now, in addition to that, I want to make sure I welcome you to use the Q&A. The Q&A, and thank you, Jacqueline, for warming that space up from Southwestern North Carolina. Good to see you here. In addition to that, well, of course, we have the Q&A. The question and answer is a perfect place to list your questions, especially when we're delving into a topic with this kind of depth today. And so we don't miss your questions. Please put them in the Q&A versus the chat. So the chat is for just that, to chat and to get to know one another and to share your ideas and thoughts and experience. And the Q&A to make sure we don't lose your valuable questions as a part of the conversation towards the end of the presentation. But if there's something urgent that comes up, either Jack, our producer, or I will insert ourselves briefly to share that with our presenter. And I'm going to be introducing her to you right now. Of course, this session this week is all about sphere of influence. And as you may know already, one of the most successful ways to build a lead list or prospect list is and to cultivate potential relationships is by working with lead peers. Trustees and other volunteers can help to identify leads off the top of their heads, but it's probably far better and richer to review a sphere of influence or SOI list of qualified leads with whom they may be connected. So imagine putting it in front of them instead of just asking them who they know. This approach helps to identify even more potential contacts, supports strategic development, facilitates introductions and cultivation, and when necessary, guides disqualification. I'm sure that our presenter will get into that, among other issues today. And of course, for all of this, we're joined by Chris Mildner, Prospect Research Analyst at the Nature Conservancy and Principal of Strategic Edge Resource Consulting. She brings deep experience in prospect research. I'm not going to tell you how many years. She'll probably tell you a little bit of that herself, but we are so glad that she can be here to share this presentation on spheres of influence and give us a sense about how to do this in a not only a beneficial way, but a really thoughtful and strategic way. So with that, Chris, thanks so much for being here today.
Hi, can you hear me and see me okay?
Yes, you are there. We see you.
Okay. So I'm Chris Mildner, and as Jay said, I work for the Nature Conservancy. I've worked in the environment, the education, and the healthcare realms as a researcher and a director of prospect research. I've done donor relations and stewardship, so everything but the actual fundraising, which scares the pants off me. And right now I'm seated in West Sacramento, California, where I work. And for the Nature Conservancy, I work for the Oregon, Idaho, and Alaska business units. And with that, I guess we can get started with the content. I'll try and pause at the end of each screen, at each slide, to see if anybody has any questions. So first of all, let me explain a little bit about what a sphere of influence list. This is something that I've used with several of my employers with great success to identify new leads. They are great for providing, for finding connectors to people that you want to get into your organization, or to just find out if they're interested. Your person who does the review can get you some background information, and also hopefully they will provide access and help with qualification, cultivation, and if you're very lucky, then they have the wherewithal to do so to help you also with your solicitation. Um, so, okay, there we go. So basically, I've done this with two different types of lists with varying success. The list that's tailored to one reviewer, for instance, one of your trustees, your major donor, an influencer, all of whom to help you, focuses on people with major gift capacity. You can also include some organizations that are capable of large and or multi-year grants or gifts. It focuses mostly on warm leads with some indicated interest or affiliation, and managed constituents who you have in your portfolios, but you're not having much luck and you need a connector, or other assistance, maybe some insight into how best to work with the person. And also, if there is enough room and your person doesn't have a bazillion names to review, some phishing names where you don't really know if the person is connected to them at all, but um, you want to find out if they know anything or are connected. So basically, this is a list of people who you expect the person to know, because they have some form of connection with them. It's a customized list, and um, very, very targeted. The group list is not tailored to anybody. It's basically a phishing list. So say you've identified a batch of new leads and you want to find out if any of your trustees know them. This is something that you can do periodically with your trustees. My Oregon chapter typically does this once or twice a year with a group of trustees to see if they know any of them and can get us connected. So this is it's generally a shorter list. It's definitely very fuzzy and not targeted. Any questions about this so far?
Nothing coming through yet.
Okay. So basically, who reviews a list? So creating a customized soy list can be hugely time consuming, especially if you have a well-connected trustee. We've had people at the Nature Conservancies whose soy lists have been over 300 names, and we've had to really severely cut them down, to go over them. So it may not be appropriate to develop lists for all of your trustees or whatever volunteers and high net worth donors who are willing to help you with this. So it's best to do it with people who are amenable to either helping with access and cultivation, or at least providing some background information to help you develop a strategy, insight into their personality, how to approach them, their life philosophy, their wealth, that kind of thing. And for groups, you may want, when you're going to have a group review, you may want to limit it to a specific group. For instance, not all of your trustees, but maybe just the development committee, because they know that that's their job to help you develop your portfolios. So basically, you can have, any trustee, high net worth donor who has a large sphere of influence who you can ask. If you have somebody who's a key influencer, maybe they're not high net worth themselves, but they're very well connected to high net worth people. if you do a lot of work with government, somebody who's very well connected with government leaders, an influential volunteer, so somebody who's maybe not one of your best donors, but is a great volunteer for your organization. Also, don't forget that you have staff that may know people. For instance, our conservation staff often work with wealthy landowners. When I worked in healthcare, our doctors were a great resource for reviewing patient lists to see if they knew any of them and could help. Maybe they used to do salons where we would have, for instance, a trustee and the doctor would say which people to invite as well as the people that the trustee knew. And then the doctor would give a little spiel. So those were really great. And then, of course, obviously, any of your internal groups can be helpful. So basically, when you're looking at this list, the targeted list is going to be, you're going to mostly work in the first two sphere of influences here. And if you have the room on the list, you can add some people from the third sphere, or a couple people from just list. You're taking the time to find out who knows, who may know who. So you are looking at maybe a higher chance of engaging the reviewer to help because they know them, higher likelihood with, hopefully those some of those people on the list would have indicated interest in your organization or related issues or services. They will be primarily high capacity, warm constituents or influencers, and a very limited number of high capacity individuals that don't have a lot of affiliation with your organization, but they do have a connection to your trustee. Because we're assuming here for this list that if a person is a regular donor, for the most part, your fundraisers aren't going to have that much trouble developing a relationship. But if they are having trouble with those people, those are the kinds of people you want to put on a soy list to get that connection. In the group list, you can put a lot of new names where you haven't identified a connector, and they can be people or organizations on both lists, but you're going to primarily focus on people because that's where, as our annual, fundraising data visualization show, that most money comes from people and their foundations. So that's where we're going to focus. In the group list, there's no connection necessary. And for both of these lists, regardless of who's on them and who reviews them, you do want to keep track in your database who reviewed whom. So every time I do one of these lists, I create a big upload of all the trustees that reviewed the list, if it's a group list, with each of the names and whether or not they knew them. And if they did know them, just a little blurb about whether they were willing to connect or if they had a little background information about them. And then for the individual list, I upload with that trustee all of the people that they reviewed and then the comments about them. And it's important to note whether or not they knew them. This is really important because you don't want to keep putting the same names in front of people. It's fine, like in 5 years, you might want to throw a name back in the list because, your board has changed and people are always making new connections. But for the most part, you don't want to keep putting names on the list again and again. Because, well, your trustees and your reviewers are going to think that, you're not very organized and you're wasting their time if you do that. Any questions about this?
There are no questions yet, but I'm curious, and I don't know if people want to say this in the chat, Chris, whether or not people have developed lists that are akin to this already, and if they're including these same sorts of patterns of people, cohorts, or if they're doing something different. So if you have a thought on that, please do feel free to put it in the chat.
Yes, I'm always glad to hear ideas from other people and steal them. um, okay, so the list criteria, or either of the lists really, is you want them to be capable of a major gift as that's defined for your organization. So for instance, in my business units, we define it as $250 plus, but for our big worldwide office directors, it's generally defined as $5 million plus. So as you can see, there can be a big variance in what a major gift is. And you can look at new donors. Our research within TNT has found that if you have a new donor that starts at the $250 level, that's somebody worth researching. So that's a little research that person's worth on the list. You can look at your event participants, your volunteer cohorts, anybody with similar nonprofit involvement, or aligned business interests. For instance, for the environment, I'm always looking at, for instance, people who are developing new ways to store energy and electricity. Of course, your influencers are really helpful. So I might include, for instance, somebody who can help our government relations team influence policy. Um, and then also one of the things you can look at is, do they have a high value vacation home in your geography? So for instance, I work with Idaho. Tons of rich people from all over the country have homes around the Sun Valley area. So I'm always looking at people there and is it possible that this trustee might know them? And again, I want to stress that your reviewer must be amenable to helping you with this list. If they're not willing to provide access to people or help you with strategy development at the very least, then it's not worth your time to do this. I will say that for someone with a small sphere of influence, it might take me a day. If I have somebody who has a huge list, one of my trustees, I swear knows everybody in Oregon, his list had 200 names on it, and we had to cut it down and then divide it into levels and go over several lists with him. So you definitely want to make sure, for both in terms of being sensitive to both staff time and trustee time, you want to make sure that this is going to be a worthwhile exercise for them. And again, I'm going to stress, you want to look at their fellow employees, their business associates, anybody they're on any kind of board with, leaders in the same industry or affiliated industries. So for instance, industries that provide parts to their manufacturing industry or something. And then any neighbors, friends, relatives. If your newspaper still does some sort of social event reporting, that's a great source for finding people that they went to events with. And again, you're looking for these, do they have an affinity to your organization or an interest in it? Are they philanthropic? And I'm going to make one little point here about philanthropy. In the last 10 to 15 years, less and less organizations are putting their annual reports and their donor lists online. So it's much harder to find gifts. And if they are putting the lists on, they're not tiering them as much, where you're not seeing, oh, look, this person gave at the 250 to 500K level. So they're just doing straight lists. So it's much harder to determine how philanthropic a person is and at what level, unless you can find something in media about a big gift they've made. And again, you're looking for a connection. Do they know your trustee? Do they know somebody else at your organization, one of your staff members or something?
And
One of
Chris,
the
we
things,
did have a comment along the way. I
okay,
just wanted to share with you from Claire, who had said that she creates major donor prospect lists once a month for her gift officers. But the main difference with the SOI that she's seeing here is that her list only includes previous donors that have not yet been cultivated. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I mean, donors obviously are your best bet because they're already warm. They like your organization, they're giving to it. So if you can find a trustee that can help foster that relationship and bring it up through the various levels, like increasing annually and then into major gift and then into principal gift, that's fabulous. Um, but yeah, it also doesn't hurt to bring in names with affiliated interests for both your fundraisers and your trustees. If you have program officers, sometimes they know those people. So it's good to cast your net broadly, I will say, when you're researching a new name to see if anybody knows them. Did that help, Claire?
She said yes.
Okay, good.
Also, just a note, I really appreciate that you got into the weeds a little bit about how you're finding some of that information. You mentioned it's not just, let's say, companies that are adjacent to the interest, but it's also the parts suppliers to those companies. And now we have usually a very diverse group of people here in terms of what they do. So some people have tools and experience to find that kind of information, others don't. So if you have tips on any of that as you go through this, Chris, either now or after the presentation, I'm sure people would love to hear how you're getting at some of that information, whether it's past giving, like you just referenced a moment ago, or something as very finite but really important as the parts suppliers in aerospace. Because for some people that may seem really far out there, but for others it's something they know how to do. So any shares there, I'm sure would be welcome.
And I won't take credit for this one. I remember at an APRA conference, somebody talking about they were researching people on Martha's Vineyard. And one of the things they discovered that was the person who built the stone fences around people's houses was rich from his contracting work. So, don't forget people who provide services to the wealthy because they can also be wealthy. Um, um, so at the end, I have a whole list of sources that you can use, and I'll talk about those a little bit at the end. Um, so one of the things that I want to talk about is when you're tailoring the soy for a person, you need to consider various things about that person and chatting with your fundraiser about who that person is, how they operate, what their interests are, how they think, what their worldview is, can be really helpful when you're tailoring your soy. So one of the things you want to consider is how philanthropically savvy are they? Have they been on a lot of boards? If they haven't, you will need to do more pre-work with them to educate them about how fundraising works before they will be comfortable with doing something like a soy. Personality is important too. Are they a socializer? Um, are they going to give you a lot of very surface information about people because they're very social and they know a lot of people, but they don't know them deeply? Or they have people who are really, say, more introverted and would know people more deeply and know more about their life philosophy, etc. Attention span and chattiness is a big one. If you have somebody who you're going to review a soy with who goes off into the weeds in conversations, it's really important to keep the list shorter. And I'll talk about how we do it. But one thing I'll say is we found that if you have two people, one to guide the conversation and ask the questions and keep things on track, and another person to take the notes, that is hugely helpful. So you capture more and you keep the person on track. It's really hard to keep the conversation in line and take notes at the same time. The other thing you want to consider is their breadth of sphere. How many people do they know? And again, you might want to create several smaller lists for that person. So for instance, the trustee that had over 200 names, we ended up reviewing, I think, about 125 with him, and we divided it into 3 lists. The diversity of their connections. If you are looking to build a more diverse board or a more diverse fundraising donor cohort, then you want to look at where they are connected within other communities. And again, break the list into manageable chunks, go over it in stages. Be sure to include a few granting organizations that they may know, companies they do business with. They might know or be able to get you in contact with the person there who manages the fund, the granting. And one of the really important things, at least on the very first list, is you want to include some names that they are guaranteed to know, who you know are philanthropic and who have interests aligned with your organization, or who are already a donor at a lower level or at a level you want to bring up. Because this makes the trustee feel successful, that they're helping you, that they can connect you, that they can help with that cultivation. And it engenders their willingness to do this again, and with more lists in the future. It's so that success piece, especially with the first list, is really important. Although I would suggest for each list that you seed it with some people that they are going to know, and hopefully they can help you be successful with. Oops, I think I went too far, sorry. Okay. So we have a preliminary process here at TNC that we go through with new board members. And this even helps the the trustees who are, shall we say, fundraising savvy, sort of wade into the pool slowly instead of throwing them into the deep end with only a rubber ducky. But for trustees who are not philanthropically experienced, this is a really helpful start. So we have specific questions that we ask them, and this may not always be over in one meeting. If they're more philanthropically savvy, you might be able to do it in one meeting, but I would suggest breaking it over several meetings and just working it naturally into the conversation. So you want to ask them, what boards are they on? Where are they connected in the community? What contacts do they have that might be really helpful? Do they have any influential friends that can help with, for instance, lobbying for your organization or influencing others to give? And I had one fundraiser that came from sales, and he said he never left a meeting without asking for referrals to friends and associates who might be interested in the organization. So you can start out with that question here, and you can repeat it over the course of the relationship with that trustee or whoever's going to be reviewing a list. And then eventually you ask them, would you be willing to review a list of prospects to see if you can help us with them? And again, you've prefaced all this with sort of gently educating them about how this works as you're having these conversations. And hopefully when you get to the point, when you ask this question, they're going to say yes. And then you might ask a follow-up question about how would you be willing to help? So if they say, well, I'm willing to invite people to events, then it would need to be mostly people that they know, probably 99% of people that they know. But if they're willing to, host a bigger event, or co-host it with someone else, you might be able to invite some donors to that event, especially if you're going to have somebody like a program officer or for instance, for us, one of our field specialists give a presentation. So, and as you're as you engage with your trustee and you start involving them in things like outreach events, helping them work a room by giving them some talking points, having them actually host events, inviting them to cultivation meetings, um, asking about interests and strategy advice about people. As you start involving them more and they become more comfortable with this, you can do more lists with them. And one of the things that my fundraisers like to do is they like to have them accompany them on outreach meetings. So, and this is with new donors. So, any questions here?
None right now.
So this is how I build my soy. First, I go to my database and I look for things like, you know, anybody on their relationship tab, if you have had your database, anybody who's been coded as a natural partner. And this is for both the reviewer and the spouse. It's surprising how many people that they're social with that are spouse connections. And then I ask the staff for names, especially for those they need help with. For instance, they're having trouble connecting, or they're having trouble developing a strategy that's working for them. And they may also have some names that they want to suggest for adding to the list who they think this person may know. And not just our fundraising staff, but you can also ask your program staff. For us, we ask our conservation staff if they know anybody who we should be connecting with. And then if you have room for additional fishing, add the priority names from your lead list. Do you have anybody who's really risen to the top as a hot prospect, but you just need that connector? That's a great person to put on your fishing portion of the list. One of the things you also want to look at in your database for people that are in there is you want to look at your contact restrictions. For instance, do they have a, we don't want to hear from you, or a don't call us code on there? Then, you want to consider that. But sometimes a volunteer can open that door when the constituent has closed it for you. So you have to kind of balance that. And it may be worthwhile to put that name on the list and see if the person is willing to try. You want to review the name with staff to add and remove names. There is so much information in my fundraiser's head that is not in the database. For, for instance, they may know that somebody hates somebody, but you can't put that in the database because bad and wrong, ethically gray. So they can tell me, oh, they no longer socialize, they hate each other or whatever, and I can take that name off the list. They may have names to add too. So we always do that. And I have a sample of the list that I use to review with my staff that I'll show you. So then I clean up the list and then we go back and we review it one more time. And it's interesting to me that the second time we review it, there's always an additional name to get added or another few names to take off. So, and that's always an important step. And then the final list I put into a template for the volunteer, which I will also share with you. That's has a lot less information than what I shared with the staff. And again, I want to stress that when we do the final list review with the reviewer, that you have two people in the room. One who's really good at conversation facilitation and will keep things from going down bunny trails, because it is easy for a reviewer to get caught up in somebody and start telling you their life story, and you don't want that. You want to go through each name fairly quickly. And then you want somebody who's going to take really good notes. If the researcher can be that person, that's fabulous, because you're going to take more detailed notes than a fundraiser. But if that's not possible, then at least have another fundraiser. Usually we have our, in Oregon at least, our director of philanthropy leads the conversation and the fundraiser assigned to the trustee takes the notes. My other business units, the person assigned to the trustee leads the conversation, and they have some other fundraiser take the notes. Um, so in other places where I've worked, I've been the one to take notes. So it just depends on how your organization works and the access that you have. Any questions about the process?
I don't see any right now, but I'm interested to know who in the audience is working in research and who's working in some other part of the office. Could folks just let us know that in the chat? I think that would be very helpful. There may be some folks here who are that's their singular responsibility is working in prospect research. Others might be in another part of development, and there are still others who work in the development office where there are no researchers. So just if you would open up the chat and let us know, especially let Chris know. That will help her as she's going forward. So we have, let me see, responses from Connor and Victoria who are saying in research. And then Jacqueline was saying, I'm the only fundraiser in the organization. Wendy, who's saying research is part of her job. So this is helpful, but obviously, still more to learn. Clara talking about how prospect research is just one part of her role. Patricia saying no dedicated researchers in the office. So you can see that there's kind of this complex arrangement of folks in the audience, and so some have these tools or these people, and others do not. And I'm sure that's going to influence some of the ways they apply these lessons.
And I will say from this, take what you can use and don't worry about the rest. If you are a single person fundraiser who's got no support staff, then just do what you can. If you wear many hats and research is one of them, you do what you can. I'm dedicated, so I can spend the time on this. I work with other people who are not, and they've said, they've taken tips from this and they've done a better job of compiling lists, using some of these ideas, but they don't spend anywhere near the amount of time on it that I do because they can't. So, for a fundraiser, you may just have a short list from your database that you share with one or two of your trustees. And, if that's all you can do, you've at least increased your capacity by that much. So this is all about capacity building. And again, you use what you can and don't worry about the rest. You know, if you're not a researcher, then you don't have the access to a lot of this and you don't have the time for a lot of this. So basically, like I said, I have the two review sheets. The one with the staff has more information on it. And I have that for them so they can refer to it. So for instance, if a question comes up, if somebody has a common name or something, and the reviewer asks, which James Smith is this? My fundraiser can say, oh, it's the James Smith that owns this company. I don't put that in the review sheet because there just isn't room to keep it compact and usable. And also at the start of the meeting, you want to let the reviewer know that you don't want to get in depth on these people. You just want to go through the names, find out who they know, find out if they're willing to help, and maybe a little bit about how, and maybe a teeny bit of background information. Then the ones that they are willing to talk to you about, to discuss strategy, to help with cultivation and opening doors, you will have a follow-up meeting with them. To go deeper into the weeds and figure out how they can help and what's the best way to manage that. The person who follows up with the reviewer can be the person assigned to the lead, not the reviewer's manager. If that works for the reviewer. Some reviewers are like, I only want to deal with one person. Don't confuse me with the rest of the staff. And that's fine. And other people are more, well, if I'm working with 3 or 4 of your fundraisers, I don't care. So whatever works for your trustee or whoever's reviewing the list, it's important to be sensitive to that. And after you've done this and you've gone through the list and you've made appointments to to determine how they're going to help, and you've gotten all that in your database, you want to be able to provide your volunteers with at least prompts for what they're supposed to do. I like using assignment sheets or lists, whatever works for that particular volunteer to keep them on track. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And I want to stress everything goes in your database. Who was reviewed and the results, the relationship to the reviewer, any follow-up conversations about the person where you discuss strategy and approach, any reviewer involvement in the contacts with this person. You know, did they go on the qualification visit? Did they help with the ask? That's all important to track. It helps you and the volunteers stay on track. And I want to again stress that you should share even small successes to keep their level of engagement. So keep them posted on progress, you know, hey, I got a follow-up meeting with this person, yay! Or, hey, they made their first small gift. Or, oh, their giving just jumped, you know? You don't have to mention the amounts, but it's really important to keep those volunteers apprised of what's happening with the people they're helping with. It keeps them engaged. It keeps them willing to keep doing that for you, which is really important. So on the staff worksheet, I have their database ID so that we can easily access the record, of course, if we need to. Their sort name and their age, if relevant. Some of my fundraisers don't like me to include people who are over 85 because, for whatever reason. And so I usually, for those people, I just highlight it, and if they want to keep them on, they can. The spouse is important because sometimes that really helps identify which James Smith it is. City, state, and county, if that's really helpful, but I normally don't include that. I look sort of like their giving patterns. Are they a member of our planned giving club? What their total giving is, their last gift date and amount, any capacity and affinity ratings we have on them, any previous disqualifications we have. And they may say, well, you know, I tried 47 times to engage that person, and that's why they're disqualified. And to which I will reply, yes, but you are not this trustee, and this trustee is a friend, so they may get somewhere, so we can at least try. And usually they're good with that. A little bit of bio background, at least their job title employer, which helps them understand why that person is on the list. And then how the volunteer is connected to that person. Are they a friend, a neighbor, a coworker, their boss? And this helps the staff sort of prioritize and wheedle down the list if it needs to be whittled down. And again, if you are, you know, a single person doing this, you probably don't need to do this step. On the trustee worksheet, we're doing this again, and we have very specific questions that they can answer pretty quickly. Because discussing and recording a lot of information is really time consuming. So we want to keep it brief. And again, remind them that you will get into detailed strategy and deeper information gathering in a follow-up with them. It's just, we're going to be quick. We want to know how well how they're connected and how well they know them. A little bit of information about whether they might be interested in the organization, and then how they might help, and if they have any like little tidbits, quick tidbits about strategy. One of the things you can do is if, for instance, you're working remotely and you can't personally sit down with that person, you can either have them fill the worksheet out themselves, although I will say a guided conversation is usually more effective because you can ask those clarifying questions that you need right on the spot. Zoom is a little bit more awkward for this purpose because you have the list, they have the list, you're not sitting down together, so it's easier for them to sort of wander off into further down the list on you. So I think it's even more important in Zoom to have both the facilitator and the recorder. And if they will give you permission, you could record the session. Although then later you probably will need to not save that anywhere for donor security. So again, this is just for gathering quick information and moving on through the names. I typically try to keep the list around 25 or 30 names. If I have a reviewer who is like really focused and not chatty at all, I might go as many as 50 names. I have one trustee who's just like, nope, don't know him. Next name. Oh, know that person. Yeah, I'll introduce you. Next name. So uh, again, knowing the reviewer and how they operate is helpful when compiling the lists. And this is a sample of an activity log that I've used. It's basically you can see these are all my superhero friends. Their name, when you're hoping they'll get it done by, when they actually did it, which is usually somewhere between a week and a couple of months later. What they're supposed to do, their notes about the interaction and what happened, and then any next step that either you or that trustee should be taking. You can use this one-on-one with the trustee to help keep them on track. This is just one idea for how to do this. You can come up with your own ideas or figure out what the trustee's preferences are for helping them stay on track. Or you can do this with, for instance, your campaign committee and go over these sheets in each meeting, which I've done before and with great success. It was interesting. We had one person who had been involved in fundraising with various organizations for years and on more campaign committees than I can ever count. And he said this was the first time that he had ever been provided with this kind of, shall we call it, a cheat sheet. And he found it hugely helpful, and he was going to suggest it to the other organizations he was working with. So that's why I keep using this, because it is helpful. This can also be used to help keep your fundraisers on track in follow-up with these people. And hopefully you would be able to put this information into the database and pull it from the database so that you don't have to redo this log each time. So you can update it directly from your database once you've got the information about the outcomes in there. So this is, he said, this has been really, really helpful.
I have to
Now I'm
ask you
going to
one
talk
thing
about
though,
some,
Chris. I have to ask you, who is Serena Kyle?
oh gosh, I can't remember which one
Because
she is.
I know who Janet Pym is, and Clint Barton and Barry Allen,
Off
and
the
Scott
top of my
Lang.
head, I can't remember which movie she was in.
Okay, if anybody knows, let us know. You get a special prize today. Oh wait, Catwoman. Oh,
Oh,
and it's the spelling
okay.
maybe that threw me. Oh yes. Okay, Kimberly wins. I don't know what the prize is, but she definitely wins. Sorry about the interruption there. Go right ahead.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk about some sources that you can use. The first ones I'm going to talk about are fee-based. And you may or may not be able to afford them. RelSci is fairly expensive, and BoardX is even more expensive, but they're a great start for a list because they give you those lists of connectors and how they are connected to the person. One thing I will say, though, is they don't always do a really good job of checking the overlap, for instance, between board service dates. And so you kind of need to verify that they actually, if you have time. If you don't, just put the name on the list. You kind of need to verify the connection. I have never used aid identified, but I have had a number of people tell me that it's really helpful as well. The foundation directory, now called Candid, is also great for pulling lists of officers and directors for nonprofit boards that they have been on. If you are higher ed, you have Alumni Finder that lists associates, relatives, and neighbors. Can be really helpful for quickly compiling a list, even if you don't verify stuff. LexisNexis also is a great source for that. Again, not always correct, but if you don't have time to verify, you can just put the names on the list. And whatever screening service you use, oh, sorry, I had iWave on this. It should have been DonorSearch. We actually have DonorSearch. I had iWave before the last time I did this, and I didn't think to change it. So DonorSearch is great. It has a lot of information about boards that they've been on, other connectors, what companies they, the usual. So you can just use these to quickly compile a list if you have access to them. If you do not have access to them, there are a number of free sites that you can use for organizations. You can go to the company website to see who they're on the board with, what other executives that they work with. You can go to Open Corporates. They have US and international organizations, one of the few resources that's good for both. And you can look up their name, and of course you need to kind of verify, because if it's a common name, you're going to get a huge number, and if the person works in multiple states, it's even more difficult. But it's a great way to find out what companies and LLCs they are in. You go into the record, and for many states, they get the information from state registries. For many of these, you can see who their business partners are, who the other members of the LLCs are, and those are great people to put on the list. Corporation Explorer is another one, where you can see the organizations they're affiliated with and who the directors are, as is US companies. Your state business registry can also be a great source. Many business registries list members of LLCs and executives for corporations, or at least the top few. So that's really helpful. Delaware sucks. I'm sorry, Delaware, but they don't list anything about anybody. Just FYI. Market Watch Insider Search is another one where you can find insiders for a public company. And then Crunchbase People and Company Search also has a lot of information about boards and affiliates and coworkers. So these are all great free sources that you can go to and quickly gather some names. If you don't have time to verify them, just put the name on the list. Reference Solutions Online, I get it via my local library, is another one that has, and this one I really like because it has the branches a lot of times, so you can see executives at different branches of companies. Directors and boards is a good one. Edgar Full Text Search for public companies, you can go all the way back to 1994. So for older prospects who worked for public companies, this is a great way to find, their co-board members or their co-executives. The org is another one. And then for foundations, ProPublica or Candid. ProPublica is free. I really like ProPublica. People search better than Candid. So if you're looking to find out, you put in the person's name, it tells you what boards they were on. Again, you may need to verify if it's a common name. But I really like their people search better than Candid's. Candid is great for showing, if you're looking up organizations, what I like about that is because they break it down into who's on the board, and then they show what they give to. Sometimes it's helpful in disqualifying people from the list if you can see that, it's their family foundation and they only give to the arts, and you're an environmental organization. Well, that may be a name that, if you have a long list, you want to take off the list. One thing I will note, for TNC, we have been told we cannot look at, even to verify employment, FEC state or local political contributions lists or PAC lists. because the FEC has specifically mandated, and many states have as well, that you cannot use these lists to build fundraising outreach lists. So just a caution there. So when you're doing, say, for instance, a Google search and their political contributions come up, it probably came from the FEC or the state or a PAC list, and you should avoid it. For people sources, fast people search is really good, particularly if you think the person in your database has an older address, because if you don't have LexisNexis, this has very similar information to LexisNexis. So, it helps to verify a person's identity based on, for instance, an older address or an older phone number that you may have in your database. It also, for some people, it will have a list of businesses they may be affiliated with that you can maybe verify with your state business registry. But the relative list I have found is fairly useless because it has a lot of people that are not actually related to that person on there. So I would take that list and definitely kind of verify the connection. In assessor maps, one of the things you can do is go in and click on various properties around that person's property and see who their neighbors are and put them on the list. Especially if it's a high net worth area, for instance, in Sun Valley, I can do that. And almost all the homes are worth at least, $3 or $4 million around where my trustees live, and I can pull those names into a list. Another way to find neighbors is the Redaris reverse address search. And you can also do a Google address search. So for instance, if you have somebody who works in a commercial building and there's various tenants, you can see what other businesses the same with them and see if you know the executives that run those companies. And of course, usual LinkedIn, you can see who they're following, you can see who they're connected to. Facebook, although slogging through all the connections on Facebook can take forever, but both of those can also be used to verify that you have the right person. So you can look at the list of, say, for instance, local manufacturing companies and see and pull the names of executives in the same type of industry or support industries for that, support companies for that type of industry, and pull those into your list. So that's a really nice way to build your list, is using those top lists that your business journal may so kindly provide for you. If you are looking you want to expand into more diverse groups, either to build your donor base or to build your board candidate pool, there are lots of resources that you can use for that. Any of the local ethnic news media, professional associations, chambers of commerce. We have like 4 or 5 different ethnically based chambers of commerce in Portland, Oregon. Particularly local VC and angel investor groups and blogs. Those are great sources of names, particularly, it's sort of nice to get in on the ground floor on up and coming entrepreneurs and get them involved early so that later when they make it big and they have an IPO or something, you're ready there for an ask. Instead of waiting until then and then everybody else has already been in the door before you. Minority-owned business lists, a lot of states have minority-owned business lists on their websites. Your local business journal will often publish lists of minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses. Your business media, any sort of blogs and listservs, may be a good source for that. Event announcements and sponsors are also good. So for instance, say your Black Chamber is having an event, you can look and see who's sponsoring those events. That's a good source of names. And of course, other nonprofit and business boards, particularly those that are invested in ethnically based communities. And of course, your regular media runs stories on, you know, local people who make it big or have had some big investment in their new company. So those are all good sources. And, you know, if you read the media and in your spare time, you know, you can always be looking. My husband sends me names that he sees when he reads the paper. So you can engage other people in this, in reviewing these for you as well. And of course, one thing I forgot to mention is donor walls at like organizations. So, you know, when you're out on your vacation and you go visit the aquarium and you work for a zoo, see who's on their donor wall. Okay. One of the, if you don't have time or access to all of these resources, there is one way that you can quickly gather some names, and that's with a very targeted Google search. So for instance, I use the advanced search because it can help you to really focus and limit your search. So you would try name variations and even try, you know, first name, middle name, last name, first name, middle initial, last name, first and last name first, with or without the spouse. But when you're just looking for what boards they're on and you want to find out what boards they're on so you can quickly see what people you might want to put on the list from those boards, you can do this one. Boards, directors, trustees, regents. I think I forgot one on there. Governors should be on there. And that still get a lot of pages, but you'll get way less than if you just put the name in. So it's more targeted and it's whenever one of these words is mentioned. And I have found that really helpful for quickly compiling a list. If, for instance, you live in a city with a common name, so Portland has, particularly Maine is another big city with that name. So you can do none of these words, and I would put in something like Portland, Maine, or BC and British Columbia. And then if it's a common name, you might want to do one name at a time. For instance, put in, they say, for instance, they live in the city of Milwaukee. You would put in Milwaukee, and that would limit this search further by just that location. And the reason to do this anyway is screening vendors don't find all of a person's affiliations, particularly older affiliations and civic affiliations. So for instance, Oregon and Alaska have a number of government committees where people might serve that are environment related. So I will try to find those. And maybe you can go on your website and find the names of those and then run your reviewer's name against those committee names and see if they've served on any of them. That's another way you can do it. You can also search Google with a company name and high level position titles to find other coworkers that vendors miss. For example, in the exact phrase, you would put the company name with any of these words, for instance, executive director, CEO, COO, CFO, EVP, SVP, vice president, and chief executive officer, to pull a list with that company of people who have ever been in those positions. If the person's been with the company a long time, this is fruitful because you may pick up past executives and board of director members that they may have worked with that are not listed currently on that organization's webpage. So that's something that's really helpful. And then does anybody have any questions about any of this, all of this? or
And
thoughts and suggestions to share about how you do things.
you gave us a lot. And Chris, if you wouldn't mind stopping the sharing so we can see you.
Oops, sorry.
We do have a couple of questions here, but I think you've already answered one, which is about which sources do you use at the Nature Conservancy? I mean, you just listed a lot of sources, so presumably those are all sources that you use at TNC, right?
Yeah, the ones that I use most frequently are RelSci and BoardX, um, ProPublica, which is free, um, DonorSearch, and of course we have your competitor BBCRM. So I use the screening information from that as well.
Sure.
Um, let's see what else. My state business and local business registries, the assessor records. I think those are the ones I probably use the most.
So let me ask you, if you were to narrow this down, because as you saw, we have people who have who are working and have research shops, people who are working without research shops, and people who are the only development person, or even development's just a part of a broader administrative role, maybe a leadership role. So if you were to narrow this down and just say, here are a few things that you would use to try and still achieve this objective, but on a more, a tighter scale, what would you use, or what would you recommend?
Start with your database and your staff. What names do they want more information about? Who are longer term donors who look like they have much higher capacity because you've done a donor search screening with them and it came back and it said, hey, they can give 250K. Let's put that name on the list. Start with those. If you have time, I would run the name through ProPublica and open corporates to see what business and foundation affiliations they may have and gather information from those. Those are the ones, that's where I would focus my time and effort, especially if you don't have any paid resources that can shorten your time frame.
And we did have a question from Kimberly early on saying, for a small development office, is there a good percent of your week that would be beneficial to devote to research? So I guess you could say time, but also maybe even budget. And I know this is hard because you have to scale it according to your operation, but also your goals. But just what are your thoughts on how people can, from smallest office to largest office, think about budgeting time and money?
I think that if you're a small shop and you don't have a lot of resources and a lot of time, if you can just spend a couple of hours a week reviewing your most current donor list and pulling names out of that for people who look like they have potential, that can do it. I review we call it the business unit thank you list for my three um, business units fairly regularly. Um, if I had, and there's one that I do every 2 weeks because I actually run their thank you list for them so they can send everything. Right now they're short staffed. So it saves me time, saves them time. So I would say start with that. Um, if you're a bigger organization and you have somebody on your staff who is curious and analytical, those are the two qualities you look for. Don't just point at some poor administrative assistant and say, hey, you're going to do research 4 hours a week. No, no, no. You want those qualities of curiosity and being analytical because those are key to making sure that you're getting good information. Um, so I would say if you can allow somebody on your staff to do, a day a week, a couple hours a week, maybe one day a month, whatever your organization can do, it's worth it because you're building your capacity. And that is essential for nonprofit survival. If you don't keep building your donor list, your regular donors are going to get really tired of you, always asking and coming back and asking. And eventually, you're going to have no new gifts or very few, or the gift size is going to go way down. So you want to make sure that you're constantly feeding that lead pool and then doing enough quick research on them to move them into some sort of management where your fundraiser can qualify them. Um, and we have kind of a rule where if we say that, you should reach out at least 5 times to try to make contact. If you don't get hold of them, move on. If that happens more than 3 times, so say over the course of 5 years, you've done your 5 outreaches at least 3 times, and you've never gotten a response, disqualify them and forget about it. They may still be a donor, but they're not responsive. They don't want to talk to you. Now, something does happen where all of a sudden they go from giving you $200 to giving you $2,000. That's worth another attempt. But for the most part, just move on. I have a friend who calls it churn. She goes through her list and she just churns through it, and she keeps very good records of who she's contacted, how many times. And when she's done, and she moves on.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with research. Don't keep going back to the same names. I remember when Bill Gates first got rich, he was on everybody's list and he came up over and over and over again. We finally just said, look, dead horse, stick, stop. I'm tired of
Thank you.
researching Bill Gates and his friends.
Thank you for all this, Chris. Really do appreciate it. This slide deck, is that something that we can share with the audience?
Absolutely. And the links in it are live.
Great.
So feel free to share it as the PowerPoint and not as a PDF.
Okay. So if you send the latest version of that to us, we will then share it with those who attended today. And for people who want to reach out to you, how can they do that?
My email address is on the front of the slide deck, and they can reach out to me that way. I'll also send you the templates for those forms that I showed, and you can share those as well.
Great. Thank you so
People can
much
do
for.
whatever they want with them.
Well, hopefully
All
I'll
I
get to
ask
work
is
on
that
doing this.
you don't like actually take slides out of my deck and forward
Of
them without
course.
credit to me.
Right, right. Well, you could probably send it as a PDF, and then I think the links may still be live, and then people will not do what we all know they should not do, which is to take your slides.
Right.
This is proprietary content, but thank you so much for sharing it with everybody here. And for a note for everyone who's with us live, of course, is that there's a recording of this session. So if there's something you missed or something you want to share with a colleague, not only will you have access to the slide deck, but also the recording. An email will come to you in the next couple of days with the links to both of those items, as well as a link to the rest of everything in our series, which is available to you through the website of our sponsor, DonorSearch, available at donorsearch.net. So thank you again, Chris. Really appreciate your sharing all this today. It was a lot, and I know that it's going to be extraordinarily beneficial to people who are here with us right now and those who watch it later. Thank you to all of us who joined us live. Thank you, Jack, for maintaining the helm here. And we'll look forward to seeing all of you again very soon. Do look for our next sessions in this series. You can look for our podcast, of course, wherever you like to listen, including our interview this week with Brent Grina, the founder of Evertrue. I'm sure you'll find that interesting about his journey from Iowa to philanthropy. And of course, we have our session on the news and views of the week on Frontlines of Social Good coming up on Tuesday at 1, plus another session in this series next week at 1 o'clock on Thursday. So stay tuned, and we'll look forward to seeing you then. Take care.